conversation with the pay practitioners around how do we make the first 90 days in a new compensation role successful. I think we've seen lots of folks moving around. I think there's been a lot of, compensation has really been in the limelight over the past several years with lots of new um, things coming down the pipeline in terms of compliance, pay transparency, inflation, compression, globalization of compensation, you name it. Comp has become more and more important. So we've seen a lot of folks able to move in and out of new roles. And so today I thought it'd be great to have a conversation around, well, how do you start the first 90 days? What's the most important thing? And how do you start to gain that trust and build those relationships and really become a pillar that people can lean on versus an obstacle people have to jump over. So we've got the pay practitioners today. We'll do a quick round since it's been a little bit of our last. So we'll go myself. I am the founder of CompTool. My name is Justin Hampton. Been in comp for almost 20 years now, believe it or not. And so we're excited here to meet with everybody. But Denise, how about yourself? And then if you want to pick the next person to introduce themselves, that'd be great.
Okay. I'm Denise Liebetrau. I'm the founder of Prosper Consulting. We provide compensation consulting services to employers of all sizes all over the globe. And I also do pay negotiation coaching. So if you need help negotiating a new hire offer, or if you just want to double check to make sure you're being paid competitively and need help bringing up that pay increase conversation with your boss, I am the person to connect with. And with that, I'm going to point to Melissa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Melissa Bixby. I am the founder of Red Shoe Consulting based in Austin, Texas. I've been doing HR and consulting work longer than Justin. We do compensation consulting, mainly focusing on startups through medium-sized employers of all flavor. I also, based on my background, do some fractional HR executive work as well. Oh.
Hi, thanks so much. So Octavio Cardenas, but everybody calls me O, part of Alpine Rewards, and we're a boutique advisory firm that focuses on technology and life science sectors. And so we do all things exec comp, equity, and employee pay. And I've been doing this for 20 years this year, so appreciate that. Over to you, Dan.
I'm Dan. Oh, I guess I work at Alliant Human Capital. I was actually just thinking about, I've been doing this long enough that I remember getting email, not receiving it, but actually getting an email address. So yeah, you can go look up on Google how long ago that was. But it's longer than all of you. And Alliant Human Capital is a wide range of consulting services, but my particular specialty is in the unusual and in incentive plans and in, harmonization and transaction work. And so all the stuff that most people in the comp world don't do very often, I do very often. And Catherine.
Thanks, Dan. I'm Catherine Dovey with Sound Compensation. We work with small and medium-sized companies, closely held, especially, and family-owned a lot of family offices. We work with nonprofits, work in all industries, which is so fun because I get to pull information from a lot of different places to come up with new ideas. We do broad-based and exec. And we also help compensation professionals with coaching when they bump into challenges and things like that. We love stepping in to help out with that kind of stuff. So I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay.
Hey, I'm Lindsay Skelton. So I lead the client success team actually at CompTool with Justin. I did comp for about 20 years in the healthcare sector. And I teach a couple of online classes too. One of them around Total Rewards. So.
Fantastic. Well, great. Well, thank you, everybody. So let's dive into it. You're starting your first week at a new organization. Denise, what's the first? I know that you actually do a lot of, you help folks negotiate salaries and make sure they're being paid fairly. You're very involved in those first, pre 90 days, what is it that you tell people, or what would you tell people is the most important thing they should do in the first month that they're at a new organization?
So the first 30 days as a comp professional and a new employer, figure out what they have in place and what's broken, and then start building the relationships with your key stakeholders, that being finance, payroll, and the key business leaders, as well as your HR business partners, so you understand the business and who to connect to for what.
Let me dive into that a little bit more deeply too. When you say kind of finding out what systems they have in place, how do you go about doing that? I mean,
yeah. So when I help people with an onboarding plan, typically it's who are the key stakeholders, right? And then you start asking questions. Do you have pay grades? Do you have pay structures in place today? When was the last time they were benchmarked and market priced? What salary surveys do you have? Do you have any comp tech tools that you utilize? How fully are they utilized? So you start digging into those kinds of things. And then you start talking to the customers of those processes to understand how are they working? Are they working well? Are they not working well? Does TA need help? What are the comp guidelines? Are there even comp guidelines written, right? Is there a job architecture in place, or is that something that's missing? And a lot of it kind of depends on the size of the company, right? If you're working with a 50 employee firm versus a 50,000 employer firm, then, it's going to be very different. But those are the things I'd start digging into. It's kind of discovery phase and relationship building in those first few weeks. And then as you start developing a knowledge of the processes and tools and resources that are in place within the compensation function, you start crafting a plan for what needs to be fixed and what maybe is the low-hanging fruit, the easy things to fix versus the things that may take more time and more stakeholder work.
And I think too, just to jump in, before you even get to that level, sometimes it's almost key to really get to know the business itself. Like, what are its goals? How is it making its financials? What do those financials look like? Because before you can go in and make any type of recommendation, start looking at what you want to change, you got to understand what you're starting with and kind of what's holding the business back and what that looks like.
Yeah, what's the environment, and is it even now a time where you can ask for something, or does it just maintain for a time until you build more depth in your relationships and trust?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say too, when you're starting to make your meet and greets, right? You want to go not only your top folks, right? Your decision makers, maybe at the business unit executive level, but also down to like the line workers and such. A lot of these companies now, it's really easy to do pulse surveys and engagement surveys. So, one, getting your hands on some of those to see. I mean, nobody ever likes their comp, so that's how I would say not one of those surveys has ever been done and somebody said, man, I love my comp. Comp's great. Know everything about it, get it, competitive, love it. Nothing to do there, but it'll give you a start, and then find ways. I mean, it's easy to set up a meeting with stakeholders in the management level, but to get them entrenched in the employee groups to see what's going on there, maybe visiting sites, seeing where the employees gather, like are the different groups, depends on the size of the organization, but just find ways to really kind of gain an understanding of what's going on in the organization, kind of top to bottom.
So, and I'd love to tag into that because I think those are all great ideas and absolutely necessary. One of the challenges I see with people taking these new assignments is there's usually been a period of time when somebody hasn't been in seat. And so the expectation sometimes is day one, you're going to fix all the stuff that's broken. And I think that part of this is setting expectations with your manager, with the CEO, whoever you're reporting to in this situation, and identifying kind of what your first 30 days are going to look like. My recommendation, if you can pull it off, you can't always, but is to start out with a proposal of first 30 days as an audit, and then we'll pick back up after that. And that first 30 days, that audit period is the time for you to go in and learn how the technology is being used, At the end of 30 days, I'm going to come back to you with some proposals about what needs to happen. During that 30 days, of course, look at what's going on in the business, what's the business economy, do the stakeholder interviews, all that as part of the audit. I feel like that gives you a really great launch pad for the rest of your year there. And you can hopefully get buy-in. I've recommended this over the years to lots of people, and not everybody can pull it off, because if there's some really tough stuff going on, or if the business environment is difficult, if the financials aren't there, on and on, you may have to compromise. Maybe you can get 2 weeks, to do the audit or something like that. But I feel like that's a great kind of way to step into it with a nice, I'm a strategic leader here. I'm thinking this through from a big strategy perspective.
So I tend to be a contrarian, although I agree with virtually everything everybody just said, which is unusual. But one of the things I would say is, don't walk in assuming that anybody knows what the hell they're talking about. So the people who have said, oh, this is on fire, or this is a big problem, might not be right. So don't assume that the fire you're walking into is the fire they've described. The reason they hired you is you might very well be able to figure out that's not the fire. That's not the issue. So, I have a colleague that recently, she posted on LinkedIn, actually. She was hiking and she fell and very badly broke her leg, and they had to fly in EMTs, and they did a triage assessment and said, no, you can't walk, and we're going to get you out of here. And recently on LinkedIn, I posted something I made a couple of years ago after my niece had an issue on a mountain that she broke her pelvis. And I put together a triage assessment for equity. But I think the concept of a triage assessment for anybody starting is a really good place to start, which is just first stop. Look around and go, is there anything that literally you can't fix? Because the stuff you can't fix, especially if it's something you can't fix immediately, don't worry about it immediately. That's the whole thing with a triage assessment, is you go, you know what? Sad to say, that is unfixable. That person is going to die. That building is going to fall down. So we're just going to red tape it and say, don't worry about that. These ones we can still save, and those ones are going to be in pain for a while, but they'll probably be okay for the next X. So that's a big piece of this, is just making sure that you know the lay of the land really quickly. And again, you want to ask questions, but then look at data. There's nobody listening to this call right now, nobody that's going to ever watch this video, that doesn't have a pretty good idea that 40% turnover is high, that 80% of the staff hating the company is a lot, that almost everybody in the company being paid less than what you know off the top of your head, not looking at data, you just know off the top of your head about what the 50th is. And if everybody's paid below the 50th, that's a red flag you should know. So look at the data for the last few years, not from a granular perspective, but just because you're a professional that's done this. I could ask anybody on this call and ask anybody listening right now, how much should a software engineer get paid on average? No one's going to tell me $35,000 a year, and very few people are going to tell me $700,000 a year. So if you see things like that, you go, wait. I looked at a company the other day, and their increases for pay for more than half their staff over the last 2 years were more than 20%. More than half their staff have received 20% increases in the last 2 years. And I just went, something's wrong. Well, how do you know that? I went, because nobody gives 10% raises every year to half their staff unless something's wrong. I don't know what's wrong, but everyone here can do that. And I think that's a good place to start, is start with your gut yeah, talk to people, look at the data, but start with your gut and go, all right.
Yeah, I want to build real quick on what Dan just said. Is one of the things. Maybe you're talking about this around this, Dan, but I am going to date myself. Stephen Covey's still around. The seek to understand and then to be understood. I've seen this happen more times than not when leaders, folks in key positions come into an organization and they immediately start saying, without having tried to build any credibility or trust within the company, just to tear down what they see has been done before without knowing the background, the history, why things were done. And like Dan said, I think most of us on this call could walk into an organization and pretty quickly assess that there are problems that, with what has been implemented, how it was implemented, what have you, but we don't really have the full knowledge of what happened in the background. So if you want to burn yourself down quicker than a house on fire, walk in and start telling them how stupid they are for doing the things they did without having any background on why the decisions were made.
Talk about not building trust and not building
exactly. You just killed yourself before you got started.
You did. Yeah. Go slow to go fast. Take your time to understand.
It's hard though, because you're like I know my emotions are on my face, right? So I'm like, oh, okay, well, why'd you do that? It's hard to just spill out. If it's not spilling out of your mouth, it's spilling out of your face. But yeah.
But I think that question that you just asked, why did you do that? I think that's a really great place to start from too, because, and kind of to pile onto what Dan was saying too, is trust your gut. But I think you need to approach everything from a place of curiosity and not assuming that things were done wrong. I like to assume that things were done in the best way that someone had the capacity or ability to do, but maybe there's part of that story that you don't understand or aren't aware of yet. There's skeletons in every closet, in every organization. Usually there is some logic behind it. You may disagree with the approach that was taken. You may have a different solution for that, but I think having questions and being able to ask those questions before you say that something was done right or done wrong is a very smart place to start from. And then also working with different parts of the business, whether it's your direct peers, or if you're more senior, talking to leadership and directors. And, the CHRO, for example, is that, why did we do this? Are you happy with the outcome? Do you think it needs to be changed? And then you kind of start to get a lay of the land and understand how you can align to what the leadership's, where they view problems, where they view successes are. So you're becoming a support to the business versus kind of potentially an obstacle.
Yeah. Can I add on to that a little bit, Justin? That is so spot on, I think. And that is that when I first started consulting, I would go into these companies and I would look around and I'd be like, what? Oh my, I was just horrified at some of the stuff, some of the work that was done by other consultants before I got there. And what I learned is there's always a reason for them looking the way they do.
Sorry, it's probably me.
I always like to ask, how does that support the business, or how did that impact the business, to try to get a sense? Because sometimes it's very easy. All of us have personal opinions about what works best, and sometimes you can get lost in your own preferences. But at the end of the day, we're business consultants who have expertise in compensation and rewards. And so I always try to go back to, what problem did that solve in the business? How did that impact the business? What were the success metrics for that program? Help me understand, did it go the way you intended? And then that grounds me into that kind of compass or place of truth, right?
And I just want to add on, to what Catherine was saying about consultants. It's important that you learn where people there learned what they think they know. Because if you go back and go, oh, so you've used the same consultant for 6 years, and I can see their presentations to you specifically say to do exactly what you're doing, I probably shouldn't start with, that person's an ignoramus, or you guys are idiots for believing this person, or why the hell would you possibly believe this? You might want to start with, oh, why did that person say that? Maybe they were trying to get around something. But start with learning where they learn things, because a lot of times, especially with executive teams, it's, well, when I worked at blah, blah, blah. Okay, good. By the way, blah, blah, blah was a high-tech company you were working at as it went public, and we make seat covers. So maybe not the same thing. Maybe a highly leveraged stock option program in a company that makes a 3% margin isn't the best idea. But, that's always, people want to like do the thing that worked at the place that worked well for them.
Yeah.
You got to learn where they learned stuff. So you can then either learn it the same way or unwind it. And that's an education process.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's more of what the seat I sit in more and more each day is educating and teaching what I know, not only to others in HR, but to managers and to employees about how we actually do the work we do and why we make the decisions we do and how it's based in fact. And we try not to have it based on fiction or egos or biases, right? So education and training, I think, is a really key component to think about as you're navigating those first 90 days at a new employer. You may not build the education and training, but keep a list of what needs to be done with what audience.
Yeah, that's good. I also, Dan, it used to crack me up because where people learn their information, there was a period of years there where I started getting the Alaska Airlines flight magazines, in-flight magazines, because the CEOs, I had to know what the CEOs were learning, and they were learning that when they were flying around. And so I was able to at least have a clue about what was going on in their brain. The one project I did recently, this guy was having Thanksgiving dinner with his brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law had invited this head honcho, like guru, OD guru, who had a lot of strong opinions about compensation. And the next thing I know, this huge company is all of a sudden taking this hard right turn into a completely different direction, just based on who somebody had Thanksgiving dinner with. So I think that's really great information to understand, like, where are they getting their information? Where are they getting their education?
I actually refer to that as the CEO point of singularity. Because it's like, well, they're like, I've heard that, CEOs, or I've heard that CTOs in this role should be making $200,000 a year. I'm like, so how many data points did you use for that? Was it just Bob? Bob, the guy you know that's a CTO?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, because I'm using 3,000 data points and 30 years of experience. I could be wrong, but also, is it possible that Bob is wrong? Just asking to make sure we're all on the same page. Could Bob maybe not have all the facts? And I don't know how many people on this call have done this, but the number of times I've worked with either VC or PE investors where you go, well, so here's what you should do. And your CEO probably should make, looking at their pay and what they do, $380,000 a year. Well, I know CEOs that get paid $120. I know CEOs that get paid $20 million. Can we maybe fit in between there at 380, because that's what the data says? I get the fact there are CEOs that get work for free. I also get the fact that there are CEOs right now on the planet who are angry that they're not making $40 billion a year. So there's a lot of data points. Let's just agree that there's a lot of data points. And maybe that one person isn't representative of the planet.
I'm curious.
It's a good violinist.
I'm curious. There's a lot of different industries and size of companies represented in our past projects that we've all worked on or employers we've worked with. What are some of the most gnarly situations you've encountered that was not expected?
Excluding outright fraud?
Well, you can talk about some of those too. Just keep it clean so nobody can backtrack to where it went, where it was happening.
Yeah. So again, I'll just throw out my two favorite stories to tell people in the industry is I once had an executive team, each of whom had set themselves up and approved each other in a circle because they moved off the board over a period of a year. So they were each board members for just long enough to approve each other's pay. So each person on the executive team had a $45 million severance package if they were terminated for any reason in the next 3 years. Now, this was a company whose total revenues were $30 million. But they had made sure there was no way they could ever get fired, no matter who the investors that came in, because they would have to get paid $45 million, which, as you can imagine, worked out well for everybody.
Yeah.
The other was I had a small firm. They came to me. They said, we've been arguing about this for years, 2 founders, and they had 7 people that had come on over like a period of 10 years that really wanted equity, and they were insistent. Now, again, the number was 7. They were insistent that each of them should get 15% of the company. Anybody do math here?
Math ain't math.
I'm like, I literally sat down with them. They're like engineers. I went, someone do the math. Like the first day I met with all of them, I went, just do the math for me. And finally, one of them goes, oh. I went, you've been arguing about this for years? So you're going to get more than 100% of the company, and the 2 founders get -% of the company? I don't understand. How does that work? But it's those kinds of things. People lose their minds. I won't, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday that we knew somebody who had, during the SPAC craze a couple of years ago, had the theoretic potential opportunity to make $100 million. Didn't, but had the theoretic potential opportunity and literally lost his mind. Like, parked all of his ethics, parked all of his morals, parked all of his principles, and just went, yeah, let's make that happen. I'm like, it's never going to happen, first of all. And what you're doing is it's not good. Let's just say it's not good. But yeah, it could be $100 million. Well,
But those two situations do point to, sometimes we do stumble across things in this profession, HR compensation, where we're dealing with so much spend. There is ethical things that aren't being considered, and there are situations you can end up in where you're like, that's not okay, and you have to make a decision. Do I keep swimming in this pool, or do I leave? And do I raise a red flag to somebody, or do I depart? And how do I handle it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I do want to bring us kind of back to the first 90 days, and kind of, I think one of the things, Dan, you brought up is, who's the person that people have to dinner that are influential. So thinking about those key personnel that you would, or the key stakeholders, the key people in the first 90 days, who's the most important? Is it your stakeholders? Is it your CHRO? Is it the executive leadership team? Is it your peers? Is it your direct team? And does anyone have any thoughts on who's the first person you want to go talk to on your first 90 days?
I feel like the most important thing is to get aligned with your boss, because they're the one person in the world who can give you air cover if you need it for anything. So to me, that's always the top priorities. Make sure that I have an understanding of what their priorities and issues are and where they are getting and feeling the heat.
Where they're feeling the heat. Yeah.
And the CEO.
Well, who was the first person you said, Dan?
Your boss?
Uh-huh.
And the CEO. I don't care who your boss is. If you're not aligned with or at least understand the perspective of the CEO of the company you're working for, and again, if you're working at a giant company, you might not get to meet them. But if you're working at a giant
Right.
company, those people publish a lot of information and they speak on earnings calls. And you can, I was explaining to somebody new on my team the other day, I said, listen to earnings calls.
Yes.
People tell you a lot about who they are and what they care about and how they shape the messaging on earnings calls. So get to know your CEO, because in the end, they are a big part of the DNA of your organization. And I've never seen compensation transformation or incentive plans work that weren't passionately supported by the CEO. You cannot make big changes happen if the CEO doesn't want them.
True. So just to tag on to that, I've said this before, HR and finance are attached at the hip, like it or not.
Yep.
So, meeting and greeting with that team, knowing, the character that your CFO is, is he benevolent and people loving?
Say that.
Or is he like on the typical end of the spectrum, Mr. No, a-hole? So it's important to build that relationship with the finance team, early.
HR is the most powerful department in the company because HR controls the most money.
Yeah.
And I would just add to that, also looking at the company structure, right? Who has kind of the biggest team? So, if you're going into a group where half of the team is engineering, head of engineering, you're going into the sales is half of the company, sales leader. You need to make sure you build a relationship. But I agree with Melissa. It's got to be the CFO. It's got to be the CEO. So what Dan and Catherine said, and then also your boss, like Catherine said as well. Those are, I think, the key stakeholders, and then anybody else based on the structure who's owning, most of the headcount. So that's where most of the spend is going to be.
Yep.
Just a quick thought on the CFO and CEO piece, though. Don't go in talking about compensation from your perspective. They don't care. I almost swore just a moment ago. They don't care. You need to go in talking about compensation and total rewards from their perspective. So the CEO wants to know, how are you going to make the company more money or cost the company less money?
Yep.
That's first and foremost, those two things. The CEO wants to know, how are you going to get the company to its goals and more efficiently do that? And if you come in and say, well, we just need to pay people more, you're going to get punched in the face, professionally or maybe in actuality, depending on who the CEO is. So spend some time. If you don't know what CFOs and CEOs want, if this is your first time as a leader in a comp role, spend a little bit of time learning what CFOs and CEOs actually talk about and want to know about, and come in from their side, not from your side. You will lose them immediately if you come in from your side, and you'll never get it back.
Well, and Dan, I think you kind of have to pick who you want to get punched in the face by, because a lot of times if you tell that,
Quote of the
session, if we spend more money, your department heads are going to love you. Your CFO may not. If you say we need to pull dollars back because we're overpaying, then your department heads may be the ones punching you in the face. But I do agree that you need to understand where the problems are and be able to effectively kind of identify how to fix those problems through multiple lenses, and keeping in mind the different personalities and the different priorities of each person.
From a more practical, tactical standpoint on the first 90 days, though.
Yeah.
You should sit down and go, all right, so where is the library of job descriptions? What have you used for performance reviews, and what's the process? Where is your comp philosophy defined and written out? And do you actually follow it, or is it just a statement? what data sources have you used to price jobs in the past? So some of these are just practical things where you're like, wait, the number of companies where wait, you don't actually have any survey data sources. Nope. And you don't even have an aggregator as a source. Nope. So you literally price your jobs by licking your finger, putting it into the wind, or checking LinkedIn. Yep. Okay, well, I could fix that pretty quickly. We should just not do that way anymore. So again, those are things you might find that the reason it's sheer chaos at the company is because it's sheer chaos. They just have never organized anything. And in that case, yes, you need job descriptions. But before you need job descriptions, you might just need to understand jobs. You might need definitions before you need descriptions. Yes, you need a job architecture, but maybe first and foremost, you just need to understand hierarchy of jobs in general, not specific job architecture work. Sometimes I say, you got to do compensation in reverse at some companies. And when you're brand new, it's like, just what's on fire? Can it keep burning for a while? Like, that fire in Pennsylvania, whatever that Fire Mountain or whatever it is. There's some town in Pennsylvania that's been on fire for 60 years. And you just, okay, we'll just drive through the smoky streets and nobody lives here anymore. Or, oh, this is a new fire. We should probably put it out before it becomes big. But that stuff starts with just getting an inventory and understanding the inventory. Because I guarantee you, if you're working at a company that's been around more than 15 years, there's at least one component of total rewards that literally 3 people care about. Nobody else cares about it, just 3 people. And that might be a good thing to go, hey, CFO, can save $175,000 a year if we just got rid of this one stupid program.
Unless the CFO likes it.
Well, then that's where you'd start learning things. Like,
the reason one of the 3 people.
Right.
Sometimes it's those folks who have a bias. You can't. That's the golden cow. You can't go.
But that's a good way to learn it, is to go,
right?
hey, let's cut this off. No, I actually need that 11th finger, and you're like, oh, all right.
Okay, got it.
Well, yeah, I will say one of the most challenging things during the 90 days, and Dan, I think we've all kind of touched on it, is you're expected to come in not knowing really much at all about the company and drive the bus 100 miles an hour, keep the wheels from falling off, as well as get on top of the bus, checking out the landscape, making directionally where we going, is it right? You're doing it all at the same time. So you're asked to be working on strategic long-term while you're still trying to keep wheels on the bus and the car on the road. So it's very challenging. And I've been doing consulting since 2008 on this side of the fence, but I've had the opportunity for at least a couple handfuls of time to go back in to be in the leadership chair for HR in fractional role to help them do just that, to keep the wheels on the bus while I'm helping them find their new leader who can take charge. And it's something, right? I mean, it's a lot. So just kudos to anyone starting afresh, because everything we're talking about sounds like, well, just do this. But when you get in there, it's like, how am I supposed to do that? I got all the other stuff. Like 15,000 people are pulling on my leg. So anyway, just a recognition that it's a very trying time.
Well, and there's nice to have and need to have, right? So, sometimes you can have a bias toward, putting all these foundational things and stuff in place. And maybe the goal, you're a tech company and the goal is revenue growth at all costs. And, and not that much of a focus on profitability. That's obviously changed in the last few years. But, if you were in that time frame, you didn't sometimes build foundation. You just bought talent and did what you had to do to fill seats wherever they wanted work to be done. And then you kind of have to go back and go backward and rebuild foundational things sometimes. So know your audience, know what they care about, know their success metrics, and plan accordingly.
I think
Go ahead.
I'll just say kind of going into 90 days, right? One of the other things is find out kind of when are the major kind of milestones or the major meetings, right? Start building out that calendar. That's a nice to have, as Denise said. But really kind of that you want to be predictable. You want to make sure you know what's happening and something doesn't sneak up on you. So really getting those calendar events and saying, does it make sense, and backing into some type of timeline for yourself. And then going back to kind of what Dan and Denise said, as far as kind of educating as well as the source of data, really kind of, I think, letting your leaders know within 90 days, right? Things have changed, right? So maybe the survey sources you're using are not the best, right? I was just talking with an AI company, and they're going back to their VC. They're looking at some really static data, and they're like, I think we're going to go scrape the internet. And this is a plug for Justin, is what I said. You should check out Squirrel, because, right, Squirrel does that for you. And they were amazed. So they set up a demo, but it's letting them know these are the new things that are going on in the market. And as Melissa said, as you jump in and trying to drive that bus and stand on top of it and assess, you also have to kind of let them know that, right, things have changed. And so there's new sources, better sources of data of how we can kind of get this and help you out.
I do want to call back something that Lindsay referred to early on in this, which is learn the business of the business. Because if you're in charge of comp, at some point, you're going to be working with the sales team, and that is the business of the business. You're going to be yelled at by the finance team, and that's another piece of the business of the business. But you really need to understand how the company operates, how the company makes money, what's the go-to-market strategy, how the company not is the same as all of its competitors, but why does it exist different from its competitors? I mean, you need to ask those questions, and that has to happen early in the process. I wouldn't even say the first 90 days. You should spend just a boatload of time in the first 30 days studying every article that's been written, studying every news article that's been published, going into PitchBook and Zoom Info and wherever else, Wikipedia, whatever it is. Study all of it. None of it's comprehensive, but it'll give you a foundation to ask much smarter questions.
And I'd argue some of what we're saying should be done as you're interviewing.
Much.
Yeah.
Like some of this stuff, like pull out as much as you can during the interview process, so you don't walk in on day one cold without knowing a whole lot. You should be interviewing them and really ask some tough questions and see if they hesitate and if they're truth tellers and tell you what's really going on, or are they hiding things and hesitating about sharing what isn't working. So you know what you're getting into.
One caveat, though, is if they're going to offer you like an AI style, meta style offer for like $100 million, don't worry. Don't ask any questions. Just take them. That's like poor advice to anybody. If somebody gives you $100 million to take a job, take it.
Yeah.
Take it. Figure it out the first 30 days. And if it didn't work out, you still made 10, 15 million bucks, and you're okay.
If it sounds too good to be true, know that it is. There's always a gremlin somewhere that's going to.
The holes in the details.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you right now, anybody who wants to offer me $100 million,
Dan saying
yes. You can hire me. I will happily work for $100 million for as many years as you want me to, actually. Give me $100 million and I will work until I'm dead.
Well, and you know, we're talking about kind of some of the data that's available externally, PitchBook and news articles and Wikipedia. When you get there, what's the first data that you're going to look at internally? I know that, you know, Lindsay and I, we work with lots of clients, and we kind of get in there, we start looking at their pricing, their surveys, the data that they have. But I'm curious from the rest of the group, as much as you can say, as much as you can spare, it depends. What would the first thing you look at be?
It's the demographics of the company. You know, where are the majority of our employees sitting at? What are they doing? That's probably one of the biggest places that I would start. It doesn't even necessarily have to be what's their comp look like. That's the second step, right? It's who are our employees? What are they doing? You know, that sort of thing that I think is super key.
I totally agree with you, Lindsay. I think that's great. I like to start with the org chart because it gives me a really quick picture really quickly how big each one of the departments are, where who reports to who. It gives me a really good idea of where the the majority of our staff are located, what kinds of jobs they're in. You know, I'm working with a company right now. They have a manufacturing group and a warehouse group and a retail group, and I want to know relatively like how big from an employee. I know the revenue numbers because I've already asked that question, but I want to know relatively speaking how many employees take up each one of those, because that's going to be where we're going to be spending our time.
I will tell you, I don't trust most org charts because they're almost always wrong. What I do trust is if somebody gives me everybody in the company and then somewhere in a column off to the right, the ID of their manager.
Their manager, yeah. I always ask for that
I want to
too.
know what's the employee ID of their manager, because then I can create a real org chart and go, wait,
Yep.
how are these 106 people directors who have literally no one reporting to them? They have a span of control of 0 people. There's 106 of them. Well, how is that possible? And why in this same company is this manager in charge of 49 people? Well, you know, and they always have some excuse for it. But those are things you go, well, so there's some like fundamentally broken things, and you might be able to sit down with somebody in HR or in OD and sit down and go, did you know this? Is this something that's getting fixed? Because maybe it's getting fixed and you can go, okay, I'm not poke at it. But sometimes people are like, oh yeah, I don't, you know, I had a client recently and they swore their span of control was 1 to 4, which is pretty low. Across the org, 1 to 4. And they gave me the data and we did a quick check and I went, it's 1 to 2. I said, almost none of your leaders lead more than 2 other people. I'm like, it's impressive and insane, and I don't understand it. How do you even get anything done? Everybody is just managing other people. Does anybody work? Oh, well, that's a good point. I was like,
but that comes to, we don't just deal with pay, right, and job architecture. It's org design that we're giving advice on too quite regularly, right?
But how do you figure out how much people get paid if you don't understand the org design?
Yeah.
You know, this engineer just engineers, this engineers and does the administration and supports their own reporting functionality. And this engineer manages 12 engineers. I'm like, yeah, they're all engineers and they're all in your world a P6. But they're wildly different roles, and they're wildly. How does that work? And people, and that's usually the answer: is it's some humming and hawing. But that's where I start.
I also like to look at the financial statements of the company, right? Like if they're a public company, I read the annual report and the CD&A, and I use that in the interview process. But if they're private, right, then I try to get my relationships built with the people who have that data so I can understand how is the business running, because sometimes they're not very forthright in the interview process and you have to dig under the covers once you get on board.
Sometimes they're not very forthright even after the interview process.
Exactly. And then that's a red flag.
Like, are you transparent? I don't think you're transparent. I don't know if you know what that means. So.
And I'm spending most of your money. Labor cost is a big deal for most employers, so you might want to include me in the tent.
Yeah, presentations around finance and business to all hands for employees is good if they're small employers and don't actually have readily available financial.
But again,
also,
talking to the CFO.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I find a lot of people in the comp space don't like to talk about org design because they don't know enough about org design. I find a lot of people don't want to talk to the CFO because they're not finance people. But it turns out you want to have an icebreaker with your CFO and you don't really understand. Say, hey, can you just walk me through this? They will appreciate it because they actually like talking about it because that's what they do for a living. And they'll appreciate you for just shutting up and listening to them. I think I've never shut up, so I don't know.
Yeah. And I think for anyone that's out there kind of thinking like, well, I don't have access to the CEO. One of the things we talked about previously was reach out to one of your peers in that finance department to have that question,
Right.
those conversations.
Build that bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Go to lunch with somebody every month in finance. Get to know those. Go to lunch with somebody in sales every month. Get to know those folks over there. You'll find out the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah.
Ask if you can sit in. If the CHRO is the person that's doing like your board presentations or your executive management presentations about it, ask if you can just sit in with them. Hey, can I just sit there? If you have any questions, I'll answer them, but otherwise I'm not going to say anything. Because you will learn more in those meetings than you can learn from any of us in a career. It's
Very
shocking
true.
what you're going to learn. So just say, hey, do you mind if I just sit in? Can you bring me along? I'll take notes for you. Just be a secretary. It doesn't make any difference. You're going to walk away so much smarter.
Yeah. And does everyone feel that managers and leaders appreciate those questions? Because sometimes they've got to say no. So it puts them in a potentially awkward position. But is that a reason not to ask?
I think you have to contextualize it, right? Say, I'd really like to understand how the business runs and how the leadership is thinking about the business, not just today, but in the future. Is there a way I could get in the room where you're having that dialogue, whether it's an executive leadership team meeting? Most of the time, you're not going to get invited to a board meeting, or if the HR function is prepping along with others for a board meeting, and you can be in those prep conference rooms where they're looking at slides and fine-tuning their story to the board. Those are great places to set, but you got to build those relationships, in my experience, first, so that they trust you to be in the room, because there's a lot of very confidential information that they don't necessarily want the world to know about.
Yeah.
Sure.
That being said, if you're at a small to mid-sized company, you probably already know about it.
Yeah, you should be able to read the tea leaves at least.
So, yeah, but again, lean into learning more from the people who already know it and do it every day. And a lot of that is just sitting and listening to them do what they do. You know, some of the best lessons I've learned were from CHROs who said, well, this is how I communicate to this group of management. Why? And they go, well, it turns out this guy hates slides. This guy hates tables. This woman really, really, really hates when you bring up her department. All right. So what I do, and then I'm like, okay, well, it's an interesting way for you to learn the nuance of communicating and educating the latter. And again, if you've been doing this for 20 years, you've done it many times. But if you've been doing this for 4 or 5 years, or you've never led a team, those are things that oftentimes the person leading you doesn't know you don't know, or doesn't know themselves. And so you just got to listen in and you'll figure it out. And the next job you get, you're going to be wildly more successful.
Yeah. One of the things we haven't talked about, though, is just the starting over at a new company. There are some people who have done HR compensation for 10, 20 years in one firm, one organization, and they don't have a different perspective about how things could be done. They don't know different industries. They don't know different approaches. And so I always encourage people, once I see they have 3 to 5 years of experience somewhere, to start thinking more broadly about what other experiences do you need in the profession and not just the company you're with, in order to make yourself an invaluable resource and to keep yourself marketable. Because staying somewhere for decades can actually be a blind spot and not something good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's, again, I think that's one of the biggest reasons I know everybody here does this, but maybe not everybody on the call. Go to local meetings, make some friends in the industry, ask other people how they do stuff. That's the biggest thing you can do is in networking, is to just find out how other people do the stuff you do. Because yeah, World at Work has great trainings, whatever, but the real world is wildly more diverse than that. And if you start meeting people out there and asking how they do things, you don't necessarily have to do it yourself, but it won't be as surprising when you go to another firm. Or on the flip side, if you get a new leader and they come in and go, everything you do is wrong, because you're going to get that in your career.
Yeah.
And it's somebody else's first 90 days, and they're going to come in and go, here's how I look at everything. And you better be able to adapt to their first 90 days. Or when you go into a job, you're going to have to be able to adapt to some other leaders. You're going to go in there as a VP of Total Rewards who already knows how they do stuff. In that first 90 days, you better figure out how they do stuff. Yes, you want to talk to all the other people we've talked about, but talk to your boss, as Catherine said, and most importantly, find out their perspective on things.
Cool. No,
We're at the top of the hour. We covered a lot of territory, Justin.
we did. This was fantastic. So we are at the top of the hour, and before we leave, I do want to say a very special thank you to Denise, Melissa, Dan, Catherine, Lindsay, and and then the two Jameses that couldn't make it today due to the reschedule. It wasn't an intentional omission of James's. They just both had conflicts. But we are very happy to see everybody, and we are looking forward to another one. If anyone is going to be in Seattle in about 2 weeks for the World at Work Seattle Summit, I will be speaking with Justin's son, and I will be in town. So if anyone is there and like to connect, please reach out. We'll be there. But again, thank you everyone so much for the time, and we will look forward to another Pay Practitioners panel season to be announced. Won't quite be right away. I am getting married in September, so probably going to take a little bit of time to be out. So again, thanks so much for this, and we will reach back out with another Pay Practitioners panel season coming up in the next couple of months. So thank you guys so much for the time. It's been really wonderful having everybody. Looking forward to seeing everyone again later on down the road. All right.
Thanks
everybody.
Justin.
All right. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.